Coming up, we're going to take a trip back to the 1970s. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Initiative Mother. I'm ready to start my next project here, and I have to admit, after Wonderfest, I had a little bit of model builder's block. I just was not in the mood to build anything. I did work on a few other things, including some oil painting, but just wasn't ready to really start another model project. As you know, I have the speedboat shuttle, which is off to my left here, waiting to get built. And but I'm going to delay that a little bit because I know Lou Del Maso has designed some new painting masks. So I'm going to wait to get a hold of those, and I'm just trying to iron out a few other concepts I have for that particular build. So it's probably going to be about in a month or so before I get to that, maybe in the fall here. In the meantime, I decided on wanting to build something different for the channel. And so one night I went onto eBay searching for some other model kit that I could build on the channel, and I came across this one here. Now, this is probably bringing a smile to your face as it is mine. I haven't had one of these since probably I was 11, but this is a model based on the $6 Million Man character, and there were a series of these released by Fundimensions. This one in particular is called the Bionic Bust Out. Here's a few of the others that were released. This one here is called Jaws of Doom, where he's wrestling an alligator. I had this one as well. There's this one here called the Evil Rider, where the $6 Million Man is confronting a bad guy from a motorcycle gang. And there's this one here where he's throwing a gorilla over his head. I have a feeling this was probably inspired by the Bigfoot episodes, but they didn't design a Bigfoot for this model, so this poor gorilla is getting thrown around. So out of all of them, this one was my favorite. It had the most dynamic scene and pose, and you can see on the side of the box here, there is a little comic that shows what is happening in the scene. Steve Austin has parachuted into enemy territory and gets caught, gets put in a cell, and as you can see, he eventually busts out of the cell and escapes and is on his way. Well, I can say with all confidence that my painting skills and techniques have definitely improved since I built this model last, and I do have a couple things I'd like to modify with the kit. But before we do any of that, let's take a look and see what comes inside this box. Now, the one thing about buying old model kits like this is you have to be careful and look at the description to be sure that the model hasn't been partly assembled. Ideally, you'd want something that doesn't have any glue on it. This one was partly assembled, but the seller did assure me there was no glue. It is a snap-tight model, so most likely the person did try to put it together, but didn't do any painting or anything, so that you could tell they had taken the parts off the sprues, but all the parts were here. When it came, the parts were just scattered in the box. I decided to put them in a bag like you see here, and let's go ahead and take a look at the Steve Austin character first. And so the body comes in two halves, and as the label implies, it snaps together. And you'll notice that one of the arms and one of the legs does have a separate cover to them, and that is so that you can view the bionic components that are underneath. So there's one for his arm, his right arm, and one for his right leg. His other leg was bionic as well, but they only give us the opportunity to see the arm and leg, and I just misplaced the part there. This was actually supposed to be the leg here, and then the arm goes into this section here. Now, the boots actually, let me take out the door that he's slamming against. The boots are supposed to hook into these two openings here. The instructions show you that the boots are supposed to come with these two hooks, and they slide right onto those two openings there. Now the boots, unfortunately, had those hooks clipped off. This is some video of me modifying the boots to include those clips again. I rebuilt the clips just using parts from the sprue trees, just measure them out. And here you can see I'm using an attachment to my handheld sanding tool to create an opening for the hooks I've made and glued them in place. And you can see they hook back onto the wall again. Now this is the head that comes with the kit. I've assembled it. It comes in two halves so I can show you what it looks like here. You can see the face resemblance isn't bad, but the head always looked a bit oversized to me. And so what I've decided to do is to print out a new one. Now on a channel a while back, I printed this figure of the $6 Million Man, and the files do come with the head separate. So I played around with some sizes and came up with this as his head that I'll be using, and it'll fit right onto the model. I just need to account for a neck, which I will build out with epoxy sculpt putty. Now, one other part to point out is the floor that the brick wall and door slide onto. So we've got a few cool elements to have to detail here. We've got a brick wall, an old rusty door, a stone floor with some shackles there. Now, one other thing I should mention is I've always thought his bionic limbs had glowing parts inside. I'm not sure why. Maybe because he has a nuclear power pack in him. He's got some other electronic components. I always thought they should have glowing lights in them. And so I'm going to go ahead and fulfill this childhood concept by adding in some pico-sized breathing LEDs from Evans Designs. These LEDs will be pulsating as they get brighter and dimmer again. Now, one last thing to mention is that the hooks that I've reattached here, they're of course meant to hook the figure onto the door. But one reason I wanted to go to the trouble of doing this also is because I think this would be a cool piece to take to Wonderfest if I can make it there next year. As I did this last year, I want to be able to make the pieces so that they can disassemble at least part of the way anyway to make everything more transportable. Now, because there are going to be electronics here, I do plan on using a plug-in component that will feed to the power source that you can unplug and plug back in as you need to. Okay, well, this should be a fun project to work on. Let's go ahead and get started. Well, the first major step here is to attach the head, and I'm going to be using epoxy sculpt putty for this and for the seams along the entire sides of the body. So I started with creating a neck for the head to rest on, and as you see here, at first I thought I'd build the neck up and place the head onto it, but it was actually best to create the neck by attaching it to the head and then place all of that into the model. This was because it provided better access to the areas around the base of the headpiece as I shaped and contoured the putty to create a smooth, natural transition from the headpiece to the neck. If you attach the head onto the neck that is already in the model as originally planned, there's just not a lot of room to maneuver, especially around the ears. Now, the one thing I found very helpful when using epoxy sculpt is to place it into a food dehydrator. Within an hour, the dehydrator is set at 110 degrees, speeds up the curing and hardening process by a lot. This was one of the things I found a little challenging with epoxy sculpt, was to wait for the curing process, but this really does move it along. And this is how it turned out. Well, now that this step is done, let's go ahead and move on to the seams along the body. So these seams present a particular challenge because of all the uneven contour that is created by the folds in his jumpsuit, and also the areas include tight corners, making it difficult to get into. I feel I have a lot of control with epoxy sculpt because it gives me time to shape and contour the material using water and sculpting tools. So once cured, it was time to move on to sanding, and the one thing you can do to minimize this part is to make sure that you feather or smooth the transition from the putty to the plastic as much as you can. So this is how the seams turned out. I'm very happy with the way the epoxy sculpt worked out to conceal those seams, but as you can see, I lopped off his head. I just thought this was just too large. The more I kept looking at it, I just was not satisfied with it. So it's interesting, I went to ChatGPT and asked what the appropriate size for a figure's head should be, and it actually estimated between 6 to 7 head lengths from foot to the top of the figure, and this turns out to be about 5 head lengths. So I did print out 3 sizes. This was the middle size, but this is now the smaller size, and it's just a little smaller, but it actually is more in proportion with the body. So I went ahead and drilled out a hole for a mounting post that I mounted onto the head, and that'll give it a little bit extra support. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this on there and fill it in with some epoxy sculpt, and I think we'll have a better looking model when we're done here. Well, once the head was dried and everything was cured, I went ahead and taped it over and started painting his jumpsuit. And what I wanted to do first was to start with some pre-shading. So this was done with a mix of burnt red and orange. These are all Monument Hobby paints now. And after that was done, I proceeded on with a mix of orange and their golden yellow as the base color for the suit. And to add further highlights, I turned to dry brushing using my Artify dry brushes. I mixed in a bit more golden yellow to the base color and brushed that on. So according to some reference pictures, this is one of them here. The zippers on the jumpsuit are a white color, and I chose not to use a bright white for this, but rather I mixed the titanium white from Monument Hobbies with their bright warm gray. And once that was dried, I just took some silver and brushed it down the middle for the zipper. Well, let me stop a moment just to show you how the figure is looking so far, and also give you a better view of the new head. I'm really happy that I stopped and replaced the head with this one. It is much better proportion to the body, in my opinion. And again, just really pleased with how the epoxy sculpt worked to cover all the seams. Now that everything is painted, you can see it blended in really well. And I did paint the boots up the same color as the zipper. If you look at this reference picture, you can see the boots are a white color, and I ended up using a wash to dirty them up a little bit. Well, I have everything masked off here now, and for the flesh tones now, I'm going to be using a new combination of colors. These colors come recommended by my friend Joe Hudson, who's been doing quite phenomenal work now. He's changed a number of things he's done with applying flesh tones. And so for the base color, I'm going to be starting off with this fawn from Americana. We'll be throwing in some of this transparent brown as we go along, and I'm just going to be adding in some of this tan flesh to bring out some of the highlights. And I'm going to start with my airbrush and then proceed with some hand brushing as we move on to some of the smaller details. Well, this is how he turned out, and I did not record myself painting the face and head because I've done that so many times on the channel, but I do like the way that the color combination worked out, starting off with this fawn color. Now that the head is painted, you can really appreciate the difference that the new head sculpt makes. I think the resemblance looks a lot better, and the proportion of his head, especially after switching it to the smaller head, I think works really well here. Now you'll notice the patches have been painted in as well. I never really noticed how much detail they included in those patches. But this is just some video of me hand painting them in, just using some extra magnification there with my glasses, and I'm very fortunate to have a steady enough hand to paint in these details. Also painted in the patch of the American flag on his shoulder. Alright, well, it's now time to work on his bionics. Okay, so these are the pieces for his bionics now. This is the arm and the leg, and I've drilled out a couple of holes here, one here and one there, and then we've got one here and one there. And the plan is to install these breathing LEDs. The one at the top will be ice blue, and the one at the bottom will be these green ones. And you'll notice they say breathing. That tells us that the light will be pulsating on and off. They each come with an individual chip to create that effect. Now at first I thought that maybe what I could do is trim one of the LEDs so that two of them from one limb will be going to one chip. The only problem with that, though, is that the lights will be breathing together, and I thought the effect would be better if they just breathe individually. The other thing I think would add to this effect is to put a drop of this UV curing resin into the hole. That way you have something covering the hole. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get this painted up. You can see I already have it light blocked from this side, and I'll get you caught up here in just a moment. And here are the bionic parts painted now. I used Vallejo's oily steel and followed that with a misting of their silver. I then painted in the various buttons and components with reds, greens, blues, yellows, and some metallic colors for the wires and such. Next was putting in the UV curing resin, and I used a toothpick for this step. Once the opening was covered, I used a handheld UV light to harden the resin so it wouldn't run while I worked on the other openings. The resin was then fully cured using this old curing box I made when I started with 3D printing. It's lined on the inside with foil, and the opening on the top is of course for the placement of this UV lamp, and I followed the curing instructions, exposing them to about 3 minutes of UV light, rotating them in between each minute. Now placing the LEDs was a little tricky because you do have to make sure you're getting that LED in the very center of that opening. And as you can see here, I'm just using various items to make sure I hold the LED steady while I apply the super glue. Okay, and here they are wired up and lit up for you to see. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, I've always envisioned his bionics to have lights in them, much like Data from Next Generation. And these small Pico-sized lights from Evan Design made that idea come true. So the next step was to install the Bionics, and just bear in mind this model was not set up to accommodate lighting, so there isn't a lot of room for it. One particular place I was barely able to fit wires was through the boot. The trick was to sand down the peg that connects the leg to the boot, and that just barely made enough room. Now the reason why this was a particular challenge was because the wires coming from this connector now, remember I have a connector here that will allow me to plug and unplug the figure from the power source. Those wires are just a bit thicker than the very thin wires that are attached to the Pico LEDs. So here I am now carefully sliding all the wires and everything into the torso. I was concerned there wouldn't be enough room for all of the breathing effect chips, but fortunately there was just enough space, although you really couldn't fit much more. But once everything was concealed inside the figure, the Bionic pieces slid right into their respective spaces without any problem. And to attach them, I used 2-part epoxy just to be sure I had a very strong bond, especially with the leg, since it has to support the figure as it rests in those slots on the door. Well, I'll wait to show you the figure all lit up in the final reveal, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and move on to the display base. Now, since Steve Austin is being held in a castle, and the first thing I wanted to do was to have more texture, I mixed in some ground terrain with some Mod Podge and applied it over the light gray primer. For detailing the stonework, I am following a technique I saw on a YouTube channel called Black Magic Craft for creating this type of look, and I'll post a link to this particular video down below. It's a simple technique that starts off by first applying a layer of black, followed by a tan color. In this case, I am using a color called Trail Tan from Ceramicoat, but any tan would work. And after that, you randomly choose stones to paint a light gray color, followed by a golden brown. You then mix the gray and the brown into the base color for more variation. Once this is dry, a black wash is applied, and you can add in washes of other colors like browns and greens afterwards. Now, just to show you that things don't always go as planned, the floor piece ended up being way too grainy, and I had a feeling this was going to be the case, but I followed through the whole thing anyway, and this was simply because I added way too much of that Mod Podge mix. So even though the piece was technically completed, I decided to dunk it into purple power and wash most of what I had applied off and start over. So this time instead, the grainy texture ended up staying along some of the recesses between the stones and took on the appearance of accumulated dirt and debris, which was perfect. Okay guys, well this is how it looks now all completed. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. That technique from Black Magic Craft works really well, easy to do, and it looks quite convincing when you're done. I'm sure the brown tones that you see here could be substituted with blue grays or grays if you want it more of a grayish tone, but I really do like the way this turned out in the end. Now, I didn't bother recording the process of weathering the door because that was a salt and hairspray technique which I've demonstrated so many times on the channel. If you're not familiar with it, I'll post a link to one of those videos down below, but you can see it was highly effective in creating a realistic look to the dungeon door. So this is all done. But I do have one more thing to do, and that is to create a base for this to sit on. The reason for that is because I need to find a way to conceal the power source that the lights are going to be connected to. And at first I thought I would place it down here underneath this, but there's just not enough room. And so what I've decided to do is to create a secondary base that this will attach to by magnets. And what I've done here is I've used a wire foam cutter to create a section here for the switch. That's going to connect now to our power source, which is actually just a coin-sized battery that's going to be housed here. This is the connector now that's going to hook up to Steve Austin's boot, and this will hook into our switch as well as the battery source. To finish off the sides, I'm going to be gluing on some styrene plastic, as I've done so many times with these types of foam relar bases. But in addition, I was able to create a decal now that is basically a $6 Million Man logo in the font that they used on a TV show. I was able to find something online that I uploaded to my Cricut, and they used the Cricut software, and was able to create a vinyl decal for them. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but this will be placed along the front here of the display. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this final step and show you what that looks like before we get on to the final reveal. Okay guys, here's the completed Foamular base. A few things to show you here. Starting with the bottom, I've got the power source in place. It's just a coin-sized battery that hooks into our plug-in. As you notice, I've got magnets here, and those will join up with the magnets now on the display base from the model kit. And then I'm leaving, of course, the back wall unglued. You can see these slide into the slots here, like so. And the figure will be slid into these slots here, and this will plug into Steve Austin's boot, which of course light up the LEDs. I also have the logo here on the front side. This again is the one I created with my Cricut machine. And we are good to go. Alright, so this wraps up this part of it, and it's now time for the final reveal. Okay guys, well here is the completed Bionic bust out featuring the $6 million man. This kit was produced by MPC under the name of Fundimensions back in the 1970s. Now I often get asked about scale, and because he's in a crouch position, I had to estimate the figure's size by measuring his limbs, torso, and head. And by doing this, I estimate the figure would probably stand around 6 inches tall, which would make him around 1/12 in scale. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the build now. It all started with the figure, and there were 2 enhancements I wanted to make to it. The first thing that came to mind was to replace that head. It is probably the shortcoming of the kit that stands out the most. Now, I was lucky to have something to substitute it with. This particular head now was designed for a 3D printed figure of the character that I did on a channel a while ago, and I'm afraid I don't remember the artist's name, and the files unfortunately are no longer available. But as you can see, the head has a much better resemblance to Lee Majors, and with my CheetahBox software, I was able to resize it accordingly. Now, I printed it in 3 sizes, and at first attached the mid-size print, but ended up replacing it with the smaller one, which measures about 1 inch in height, or approximately 23 millimeters or so. There are a few other odd things about the figure, but just replacing the head made a drastic improvement. The other enhancement was to the bionic limbs, and that was to add in something I've always envisioned the bionics to have, which are blinking lights. For this, I used blue and green pico-sized breathing LEDs from Evans Designs, and there was just enough room for them. I thought it might turn out to be a bit much, but I think it ended up being a nice touch. The most time-consuming part of working with the figure was addressing the seams that run along the entire circumference. For this task, I decided on using epoxy sculpt putty, which worked out well. The material not only covers over the seam, but it allows one to mold and shape it so that it mimics the clothing around those areas. I also felt that this helped avoid repeat applications, as I think that would be the case if you were using regular putty, and the amount of sanding was also minimized. As for painting, the Monument Hobby colors were a good choice. I really love how vibrant their pigments are and how easy they are to paint with, both with the airbrush and if you decide to dry brush. The display base is probably the best aspect of the model kit. I think the designer did a great job creating it. From the look of the crumbling bricks and the collapsing door to the surface textures, it really makes for a dynamic scene. I did have to work around the fact that the model was not designed with lighting in mind, and I felt that the base did not have a place that could easily accommodate the power source. So I created a secondary one for it to rest in, using Foamular and styrene plastic. I textured the foam to mimic the look of the stone floor, and in the end there was plenty of room to house the coin-sized battery power source and conceal the wiring. This vintage kit was fun to do and certainly brought back a lot of memories, but I have to say I got the biggest satisfaction from applying advanced techniques to bring this model to another level. Alright, well that is going to be a wrap for now. I hope you enjoyed following along. I do want to say thank you to all of you who had left some great comments and some kind comments on my Facebook pages and the model pages that I post on as I was teasing about this build. Certainly seemed to generate a lot of interest, and no doubt brought back a lot of memories for all of us who grew up in this time period. $6 Million Man was the thing to talk about when you got to school the Monday morning, because it was shown on Sunday nights. Now, if you guys were following along on Facebook, you probably noted there was a bit of time between my last post about this and publishing this video on the channel. The Star Trek convention came up this last weekend. In fact, I just came back from it. A lot of fun, always a fun time to go to that show. And but between that and just a bunch of things going on with work and other things keeping me busy, I just did not have time to finish editing this video. So I apologize for the delay there, and I know I kind of left you guys hanging after posting all about this model for a week or so. But the model's been completed for some time. I just finally got around to finish up the video. As mentioned, this was a lot of fun to work on, and it's made me think how it would be cool to acquire some other vintage kits. In fact, I'm working on getting another $6 million man kit here that I could take with me to Wonderfest. It would be nice to have at least a couple of them to display. And I also have an old Planet of the Apes vintage kit I've had for a long time, and it was just great to put this together and also to apply techniques I've learned. I've certainly come a long way since age 11, but also incorporating 3D printing to upgrade the kit a little bit. I didn't want to go too overboard. I thought the lights and the head weren't going to be too much. I really wanted to retain the essence of the kit, and that'll be the same case if I do build other vintage kits here on the channel. Alright, well, it's time to wrap this up, and before I do so, I wanted to add two more things. First of all, I did paint the soles of those boots black. If you recall, the reference picture I showed you here had him wearing white boots with black soles. I did not have those painted for the final reveal, but I did get that done. And secondly, I'd like to ask that you guys refrain from requesting any copies of the head I used for this project. Unfortunately, I lost the name of the artist, and even though I purchased the files, I did agree with him at the time of purchase that I would not be selling any printed pieces, and so I'd like to respect the wishes of the artist. Now, as I was posting pictures of this build on Facebook, someone did bring to my attention there is another source where you can get a printed headpiece, and I'll post a link to that below. Again, is not the same one that I'm using here. Alright guys, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at initiativemodeler@gmail.com, and I will see you then in the next video. Thanks again for watching.